What is tech authoritarianism?
Tech authoritarianism is about replacing existing democratic structures with governments controlled by billionaires and their technology systems.
A notion that technology and the ideology that informs it can govern human beings and centralize power among a certain elite.
Any kind of power that has freedom to shape the way you think, you behave, and the way you relate to one another. This is where authoritarianism is strangulating people's self-actualization and agency.
If you saw Donald Trump's inauguration, you saw the CEOs of the world's largest tech companies lined up in the second row in front of the United States cabinet. That is tech authoritarianism in a single image.
If the technocrats who have infiltrated Washington are trying to install a new world order, and this feels like unprecedented times, know that they have tried this kind of thing before. In the early 1930s, a self-proclaimed American engineer named Howard Scott founded a movement called Technocracy Incorporated. America was in the midst of the Great Depression. Fascism was on the rise in Europe. Economic systems and democracies were being put to the test. Scott and his fellow technocrats had grown tired of what they saw as the waste, fraud, and abuse of government. They proposed replacing democracy with what they called a technocracy. Sound familiar? And when one examines the arguments that technocrats have made both then and now, one can see in their own words, mottos, and manifestos how democracy can be replaced by a form of tech authoritarianism.
Technocracy was appealing at a time when we were in a mass societal upheaval. We had the Great Depression. We were barreling toward World War II, whether we knew it or not. And so you're going to get out of that desperation movements of people who think they have found the answer and who seek to impose that answer on a wider section of society.
Instead of the mess and compromise and debate of human politics, that is the very stuff of democracy. You had this idea that you could technocratically manage. You just needed a couple of scientific figures sitting somewhere with perfect information about the rest of us, making decisions for everybody else.
In the case of Scott, it turned out he was inflating his credentials, but as he became more famous and there was more scrutiny, it became clear that technocracy was built on a foundation of sand. And it sounded really good to people desperate for an answer or thinking that science can save the day, but unfortunately, it was all a flawed premise.
It is very ironic that a movement purporting to be one that rides above politics, one that rides above personality, depends on a cult of personality, depends on a leader presenting himself as a certain type of person, right? In this case, fraudulently, manufacturing credentials. But you know, this charismatic leader is always an important part of any political movement, even one that denies its own politics.
At its peak, Technocracy Incorporated boasted 500,000 members in California alone. But the movement failed to survive the scrutiny it attracted. It also came up against hostile media coverage. The New York Times ran more than 100 critical stories on it, and ultimately, Tech Inc. withered away. In retrospect, the group's real failing was it was ahead of its time. The technology of the day was just not up to the task. Its ideas did not die. They just went dormant, while the world, led by the US, got busy developing the technology that would usher us into the digital age.
After World War II, the United States was the unquestioned leader of the world. And World War II had taught the leaders of the United States that in order to win, in order to prevail, they must pour resources into science and engineering.
Typical narrative is regulation will stifle innovation, so you need to do less regulation for more innovation. But actually, regulation, if done right, opens up markets. So it's more about what kind of regulation do we need which can enable innovation, because you can regulate monopolies and incentivize entrepreneurs.
The only reason that we got the computer age, really, is as a result of government intervention against a telephone monopoly, AT&T, in 1956. They were a massive monopoly, but they also had a research arm called Bell Labs, and they had come up with the basis of computer chips. But because Bell Labs sat in the AT&T monopoly, Bell Labs didn't have the incentive to really develop that technology. They were just kind of sitting on the patent. So in 1956, the federal authorities settled a case against AT&T, the telephone monopoly, and forced AT&T to license thousands of Bell Labs patents for free. This then let other competitors come in and basically gave us the computer age altogether.
The government's two-tiered approach, funding research while keeping the market competitive, helped pave the way for what would become Silicon Valley. By the 1990s, however, Washington's appetite for breaking up monopolies had waned, allowing Microsoft to dominate the market. And that approach went largely unchallenged on corporate news outlets, where, due to their own interests, regulation had become a dirty word. The Department of Justice finally did take action against the company in a case that dragged on for years and was ultimately dropped. Still, that litigation convinced Microsoft to back down, creating an opening for a new wave of tech innovation, led by so-called disruptors out to upend the industry and transform the world.
Back when they were master's students, Larry Page and Sergey Brin wrote a paper, and they basically said, if you want to have a proper search engine that really serves folks, you must not fund it by advertising. Because if you fund it by advertising, then the interests of the company who's providing the search engine are going to slowly diverge from the interests of the people who are looking.
And when they generated this phrase, "don't be evil,"
if you want to get hired, you'll have to fit in with Google's corporate philosophy, which is,
don't be evil.
what that meant was, don't be Microsoft. Because when Google rose in the late 1990s, Microsoft was the embodiment of evil to these engineers who had this sort of playful hacker ethic. Microsoft was a top-down company. It offered locked-down software so that everybody's computer worked the same way. There was no customization. There was no flow. There was no play. There was no improvisation.
Google tried for a while to find a business model that didn't depend on advertising. They didn't find one. Instead, they got invested in by VC, and the demands of those investors to start to see profit got more and more intense until ultimately they washed their hands of it and they said, you know what? We can think of one way to make this search engine be profitable, and that's advertising. So as we now know, what then happened is Google started to suck all of the value, billions and billions and billions of dollars from the advertising market. And in the same stroke, it took the economic ground out from under the entire news media.
The site that fascinates me the past few weeks is the Google News site. Google, of course, is this great search engine, and now they have a site where computers choose what the stories are.
The media really fell hook, line, and sinker for the tech savior trope. They got into this rut of these guys are changing the world and everything is going to be different. I think that was largely based on people not understanding where technology was going to take us and not seeing it not only as a threat to democracy, but as a threat to the continued existence of an independent media itself.
What does that mean to the public sphere? It means there's less quality journalism. It means that our public vision is polluted by lots of content that looks like journalism but isn't really journalism. And we see the erosion of democracy all around the world as a result.
The founding myth of Silicon Valley, I think, has been incredibly important in creating basically public permission for their dominance, because the media told a story that wasn't about giant corporations consolidating. It was about some lone genius in his garage, these tiny little brilliant upstarts that somehow, through sheer programming wit, become world astride colossi. But of course, the truth is more complicated.
Google is now worth nearly $2 trillion. Last year, a federal judge ruled that the company's online search monopoly violated U.S. antitrust laws. That marked the first meaningful intervention against a tech monopoly since the Microsoft case back in the 90s. Google understood how we searched, how we spent time online. But the next trillion-dollar tech company would, under the guise of connecting us, come to know its users far more intimately. Facebook and its founder, Mark Zuckerberg, would also change the ethos of Silicon Valley into one that prioritized rapid innovation over the safety of its users.
Are you on Facebook yet? The site
Move fast and break things. Facebook's motto basically means, let's not worry about people and let's not worry about the effect that we're having. Let's just ship, 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 ship.
It's a way to keep the next big thing on Facebook.
What that basically meant was that Facebook pushed a product, social media, out into the world without necessarily knowing or caring what the effect of that is going to be.
Back up, guys, back up, back up.
What we really need to recognize is this move fast and break things, even though we hate the term, did actually do some good. Because if they went slow, then the ones who have power would have recalibrated and destroyed them. So when you move fast and break things, you're able to actually genuinely create something new. I am not rationalizing it, I'm just saying that there was a reason why it became popular.
Another way to say move fast and break things is to say the ends always justify the means. We're going to try anything that might work. Even if it results in something bad, we'll learn from that and we'll continue to go.
That's really empowering, right? Because now if you're an engineer and you're trying something, you don't have to get approval of a bunch of different layers of management. You just go try something, and then when it works, it worked.
Facebook now basically admits, for example, that the genocidal attacks against the Rohingya people in Myanmar were incited and fueled on Facebook itself. So Mark Zuckerberg would go and say he was terribly sorry about all of this and that they were going to make adjustments to their algorithm and staff it with content moderators to deal with this problem. But it would happen again and again.
Attracted by what felt like progress, new forms of communication, with the added allure of convenience, people showed more and more of themselves online, unaware or resistant to the idea that there would be a cost: privacy. But in 2013, that reality could no longer be ignored after Edward Snowden, a private contractor working for the National Security Agency, revealed how the U.S. government had turned technology into a mass surveillance program. That companies selling people the idea that they were empowering them were in fact exposing them.
The NSA specifically targets the communications of everyone simply because that's the easiest, most efficient, and most valuable way to.
One of the things that was most shocking and ironic, I think, about the Snowden revelations is that they showed that the surveillance state that used to be a kind of ghost story that people talked about was actually real. That the cozy story that big tech had told, where we at least are not the government, you know, we've got your back, we're going to keep you safe from government surveillance, wasn't in fact true. What had actually been happening behind the scenes is that big tech were collecting huge amounts of sensitive data on all of us. And the NSA was able to get all of that stuff through the back door.
They say wiretap, we say fight back.
If you flash back to 2013 and you listen to the anger and you listen to the frustration, you listen to the complaints of civil liberties organizations, you would think that the response would have been to seal off the US government from all of this personal data. The opposite happened. In the years since the Edward Snowden revelation, the US government, through its intelligence services and its military, have gone into very serious and strong partnerships with Google, with other artificial intelligence companies, with Palantir, which is, I think, one of the more alarming Silicon Valley giants.
If you think about Palantir, the most important thing to know about it is that its first funder was the venture capital arm of the CIA. Palantir basically exists to help government agencies, police, spies, war makers do what they want to do more efficiently and better, or at least that's their sales pitch. One of the very first stories out of the Edward Snowden revelations was how Palantir's data was being used to help identify targets to be killed in drone attacks, for example. And if you want to understand Palantir, you should also think about Peter Thiel, its founder, who is a classic example of a techno-authoritarian.
Peter Thiel has over time abandoned democracy, and quite explicitly. When you look at the ideology of Silicon Valley today, and I'm not talking about rank and file engineers, but the leaders who are extremely wealthy and very confident about the fact that they know best, have sort of gathered under this ideological umbrella of something close to techno-fascism.
Mr. Peter Thiel.
This notion that a team of elites, always men, should be making all the decisions.
We're voting for Trump because we judge the leadership of our country to have failed.
When Peter Thiel says that he doesn't see freedom and democracy as compatible, it basically comes down to how he sees democracy, which is democracy is tedious. It pulls you down because it's messy, it's slow. And this is very typical of any of these tech moguls, from Bezos to Musk to Peter Thiel, is that they see themselves as liberators for the subjects under them, but on their terms.
By the early 2020s, this was the state of play. Inertia in Washington had allowed the tech giants of Silicon Valley to burgeon into trillion-dollar monopolies with enormous influence. Politicians had come to understand that the new kingmakers weren't media barons like Rupert Murdoch, but tech billionaires. In part because the technology that they controlled had undercut traditional news organizations, polarized their audiences over their coverage, and demolished their business models. News media are supposed to reflect society. Today's technology has proven that it has the power to shape it, to swing elections, fuel wars, get inside our heads, watch our every move. And if that isn't concerning enough, then this part is. There's nothing democratic about technology. It cannot be voted in or out, but it can be sold.
Elon Musk walked into Twitter with that sync as a way of telling the people who worked there that things would never be the same. We decided to dismantle it top to bottom, to drive people out. He decided to bring his own people in. He decided to make it purely a propaganda instrument for his own hobbies and interests and obsessions.
In my coverage of these tech guys, a lot of them have talked over the past few years about Twitter as a prototype for what you could do to a government. Take over, gut it, change the rules and empower a whole different group of people to be in charge. I don't even think he thought back then that he'd have the chance to do it so soon. But circumstances conspired to create a situation where Trump returns with J.D. Vance as his vice president.
CBS News projecting Donald Trump will be the 47th president of the United States.
Today was a unique celebration of a historic political comeback.
Donald Trump's ascension in large part with the help of Elon Musk, not only with America PAC, but also, of course, his platform of X.
When it came time for Donald Trump to choose a running mate this time, Donald Trump was looking for someone who could make sure to bring in the power and money of Silicon Valley. And J.D. Vance was perfect for that. That partnership has worked out rather well. Vance has taken on much of the charge of embedding the ideologies of technocracy into the current Trump administration.
The thing you have to understand about J.D. Vance is that he's almost completely a creation of Peter Thiel. After he got out of Yale Law School, Vance went to work for one of Thiel's companies in San Francisco. When Vance ran for Senate, Thiel spent more money than had ever been spent in a Senate campaign in history to get Vance elected. When Vance was considered a candidate for vice president, he had a big problem. He had compared Donald Trump to Adolf Hitler, and it was Peter Thiel who made the peace between Trump and Vance and got him on the ticket.
J.D. Vance is one and aligned with the techno-authoritarians. You have seen him, for example, go to Europe and berate European leaders for their efforts to control tech monopolies under European law, saying, what are you doing? You have no right to control our companies. We will say what the law of these companies should be, not you.
There's no room for firewalls.
What is the most disturbing is the fact that there's not the need to hide it.
Should I get in? Get in.
And when you feel you don't need to hide this sort of transactional relationship, not only that, you take ownership of it. It means that you don't care a damn about public opinion of a certain kind. You're not the president or the vice president of all of the US, which means that you're going to espouse for a divided America.
Billions and billions of dollars in waste.
The major project of the Trump administration is to impose tech authoritarianism. I think a major way that's happening is in the way that Elon Musk is being allowed to not only take over government and act as its dictator, but to unleash his own AI systems in the government, to suck up data, to become more smart, more powerful, and eventually to give him a sort of lasting and permanent control over certain aspects of our government.
There's a deep belief that there is predictability in human nature, and that human nature is in sync with the way in which computer systems work. And that tends to come from people who are, well, like that, right?
We're trying to get it to give us
These computer scientists tend to be very black and white and approach it in these terms, and they project that onto the rest of the world.
You know, what we need are people who are really good with computers.
And I very much view tech authoritarianism as a kind of cult that has sprung up to try to impose this very extreme worldview on everybody else. And in many ways it does function like a cult. They're trying to take advantage of the turmoil and the instability of the world in the 21st century and use that to bring about a new world, a new vision of governance. And so I think that's a very important thing to remember, is that we've seen movements like it before. The difference is that these guys have billions and billions of dollars, and they're all intertwined in our government, and they have very powerful technological systems at their disposal.
One final note on where we got our start: Technocracy Incorporated. The movement had a branch in Western Canada led by a man named Joshua Haldeman. Disillusioned when the Canadian authorities outlawed the organization, Haldeman moved his family to South Africa in 1950. His daughter would marry a man named Errol Musk. They had a son named Elon. It's just one connection, one bloodline, but Elon Musk's grandfather would be happy to see where this story has gone. With technocrats, their money, their monopolies, and armed with the most sophisticated technology the world has ever seen, at the heart of power in America.